What if the price of silence was love itself? The storm had not yet begun, but the air already tasted of its sharp metallic and waiting. A black car slid through the narrow lanes of old Vienna, its headlights slicing through the fog like slow-moving knives. Inside, a man sat alone in the back seat, his reflection fractured across the rain-slicked window. His name was Adrian Volker, billionaire industrialist, architect of empires, and tonight, he was about to purchase something that could not be bought. The driver stopped before an old stone mansion that had once belonged to a composer. Its windows glowed faintly through the mist, the kind of glow that hid secrets more than it revealed them. Adrian stepped out, his breath a ghost in the cold. He checked his watch. 11:59 p.m., the time of endings and beginnings. Inside, the air was warm, perfumed faintly with lilac and dust. At the grand piano sat a woman, her back straight, her hair tumbling in loose, dark waves. Her name was Alara. Her fingers hovered above the keys as if she were unsure whether to play or protect what remained of her silence. "You came," she said softly, not turning around. "I always do," Adrian replied. A pause. Then, a note, one single, trembling sound that filled the hall like a confession. He placed an envelope on the piano. "This should cover everything. Your apartment, your travel, your absence." Alara didn't move, and my heart, Adrian's jaw tightened. That wasn't part of the deal. Her laugh was small but sharp, a fragile thing with edges. Love never is. The note she had played lingered, echoing through the high ceilings before dissolving into silence. That was the sound of something ending, though neither of them could admit it. They had met 3 years ago, in a world far from this one, on a stage lit by golden chandeliers, when Adrian was still learning how to forget and Alara was learning how to be seen. He had funded her first concert, hidden beneath an alias, drawn not to her beauty but to the pain threaded through her voice. Every song she played carried a secret, and in each one, he heard something that terrified him. Truth. Now, that same truth was a threat. Rumors had begun to stir about the woman behind the man who controlled half of Europe's energy grid. About whispered promises and shadowed meetings. One photograph could dismantle everything he had built. And so Adrian did what he had always done. He controlled the narrative. With money, with silence. But love never followed his rules. In the days that followed, Alara vanished. Her apartment emptied overnight, her phone disconnected, her name erased from the concert programs. Vienna forgot her quickly, cities always do. But in Adrian's quiet moments, when the noise of power faded, her memory returned, uninvited. The way she tilted her head when she listened. The soft defiance in her smile. The question in her eyes he never dared answer. Then came the letter. It arrived without a return address, slipped beneath the heavy doors of his London office. No signature. Just one sentence written in her looping script. "You can't buy silence when love still breathes." He read it once, twice, then burned it. But the ash stayed beneath his nails. The following week, whispers spread again. A new piece was being performed in Prague, a piano sonata titled The Cost of Silence. No composer listed, no program notes, only a single date and a venue, the abandoned opera house by the river. Adrian told himself it couldn't be her, that she had taken the money and disappeared into another life. But something inside him, a pulse, a tremor, refused to let it go. On the night of the performance, the city was drowning in rain, the streets glimmered like broken glass. He arrived late, slipping through the cracked doors of the opera house, where the audience sat wrapped in candlelight. Dust drifted through the air like forgotten time. And there at the piano was Alara. She didn't look at him, didn't even seem to see him. Her fingers began to move, and the room held its breath. The melody was unlike anything he'd heard, beautiful, devastating, alive. It told the story of two souls who met in the dark, who tried to bury their love beneath gold and lies, but whose hearts refused to be silenced. Every chord seemed to accuse him. Every pause was a wound reopened. When it ended, no one clapped. They couldn't. The silence after the final note felt sacred, unbearable. Then, she stood. Their eyes met across the distance, and for a moment, the years between them disappeared. But in that moment, he understood what she had done. This was her confession and her revenge. The sonata was dedicated to him. Every patron, every critic, every camera in that hall now had his name tied to hers. Love had become truth, and truth had become exposure. By morning, headlines erupted. Alara returns with masterpiece dedicated to unknown patron. But the world didn't stay ignorant for long. They traced the funding, the connections, the private accounts. Adrian's empire trembled. In his penthouse, he watched the storm roll over the city, her music still playing on repeat. The deal he had made, the silence he had bought, was collapsing, note by note. And yet, somewhere deep within, he felt something he hadn't in years. Relief. He remembered the night he'd first found Herlon in a small jazz bar, playing to an audience that wasn't listening. He had asked her then, why play when no one cares to hear? And she had smiled. Because the right heart always does. Now, it seemed, she was right again. A week later, Adrian disappeared from public view. No statements, no press. The world speculated. Some said he fled. Others claimed he'd been ruined. But in a quiet coastal town in Italy, a man fitting his description was seen sitting by the sea, sketching in an old notebook. Locals said he never spoke, except once to a young girl who asked about the music he was humming. "It's a love song," he told her, "for someone who refused to be forgotten." Back in Vienna, Elara's career soared, yet fame brought no peace. Every stage she stood on, every applause that thundered, echoed with a ghost. Late at night, she would return to her piano and play the same sonata, the one he had heard, the one that had set them both free and chained them forever. But one evening, as autumn spilled through her open window, she found a parcel resting on the sill. No sender, just her name written in a familiar hand. Inside was a recording, a simple piano piece, unfinished, its melody tender but uncertain. Attached was a single note: "Some silences can only end in music." She pressed play. The room filled with his presence. The piece was hesitant, searching, like someone finding their way back after being lost too long. Without thinking, she sat at her piano and began to play the missing half, her hands answering his. Two melodies, distant but entwined. And for the first time, their music spoke what their words never could. Outside, rain began to fall, soft, forgiving, endless, the kind that makes the world feel like it's remembering something beautiful and broken. Somewhere between the notes, she smiled. He had bought her silence once, but love, in its quiet defiance, had written the ending itself. Yet even then, one question lingered, one she could never silence. No matter how many songs she played, had he written that melody for her, or for his own redemption? The final note trembled and faded, leaving the answer suspended between them, like the last breath before the truth. And in that fragile stillness, love waited. The night the music ended, Elara could not sleep. The melody, the one he'd sent, haunted her, looping endlessly in her mind, each note echoing like a heartbeat trapped in time. The letter lay open on her piano, the ink slightly smudged from where her fingers had lingered too long. Some silences can only end in music. Outside, Vienna shimmered under a thin mist. The city had grown used to her fame, to the way her name now filled posters and playlists. But beneath the applause, Elara felt a quiet hollowness. Success had given her everything she once dreamed of except peace. She pressed the keys again, playing the unfinished melody. It wasn't just music, it was a message, coded, personal. The phrasing, the rhythm, even the way the final bars faltered, it was deliberate. Adrian had always hidden his emotions inside structure, logic, and control. But here, the cracks showed. It was as if he wanted her to find something buried between the notes. She began listening closer. Not to the melody, but to the silence around it, the pauses, the breaths. Something was there. At dawn, she called Lucas, her old sound engineer, a man she trusted like a brother. He met her at the studio with tired eyes and coffee. Together they examined the recording, isolating frequencies, amplifying echoes. Then, beneath the final chord, faint but unmistakable, a second sound emerged. It was the sea. Waves breaking distant gulls. Lucas frowned. "You think it's a location?" "I know it is," she whispered. 2 days later, Elara was on a train heading south, her reflection flickering against the window like a memory she wasn't sure belonged to her anymore. Outside, fields gave way to hills, then to cliffs where the sea began. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. Some journeys demanded secrecy, the kind that bordered on faith. She arrived at a coastal town in Italy, small and sun-washed, the kind of place where time moved slower. The locals spoke softly, as if protecting a shared secret. She walked its narrow streets, her eyes catching on faces, movements, fragments of color, searching for something she couldn't name. Then she heard it. From across the square, a familiar sound drifted through the air, a piano, not grand or polished, but old, its tone slightly uneven. The melody was the same one he had sent her, though played slower, gentler. She followed it through an archway to a small cafe where a man sat by an open window, playing to no one. For a moment she didn't breathe. The shape of his shoulders, the tilt of his head, it was him, Adrian. But when he turned, the man was older, his face lined differently. He smiled kindly, unaware of the chaos unraveling in her chest. "You like the song?" he asked in Italian. "It's familiar," she managed. He nodded. "A traveler wrote it. Stayed here for a while. Always by the sea, always sketching." Her pulse quickened. "Do you know where he went?" The man shrugged. "He left one morning. No goodbye. Said he was looking for peace." That night, she walked to the edge of the cliffs where the waves crashed below, their rhythm steady, eternal. She sat there, her coat wrapped tight, watching the moon ripple across the water. Peace, she thought, was just another kind of silence. But love never stayed quiet. In the days that followed, she found traces of him everywhere, a napkin with his handwriting in a cafe ledger, a sketch of the shoreline signed with a single A. Even the locals spoke of a man who drew endlessly but never smiled. He had become a ghost in sunlight, a man living between guilt and forgiveness. Elara began to play at the cafe each evening, filling the space he once had. The owner, an elderly woman with soft eyes, told her he said someone would come, someone who would finish the song. Each night, she played the melody he'd left unfinished, and each night, she added something new, her own voice, her own truth, until the music became theirs again. People began to gather, not just for the beauty of the notes, but for the feeling that lingered in the air, something healing, something human. Then, one evening, as she played beneath the dying sun, a stranger stepped inside the cafe. He wore a simple coat, a cap pulled low, his posture modest, almost invisible. But Alara felt it before she saw him, the shift in the air, the sudden tightening in her chest. He stood at the doorway, motionless. When she finished, he didn't clap. He simply looked at her the way a person looks at a memory they thought was lost. "Adrian," she whispered. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as if the act of being seen again required effort. The years had changed him. The sharpness had softened, the armor gone. There was humility now, and something else, fear. After the cafe emptied, they sat by the shore, the sea stretching endlessly before them. "I didn't think you'd come," he said quietly. "I didn't think you'd disappear." He smiled faintly. "I had to. Everything I touched turned to noise. I wanted to learn what silence sounded like without buying it." The wind moved between them, carrying the scent of salt and regret. "You sent the melody," she said. "Why?" He looked out at the waves. "Because it was unfinished." Like us, for a long time, neither spoke. The sound of the ocean became their language. Finally, she said, "You hurt me more with silence than you ever could with words." "I know," he said. "That's why I stopped running." She studied him, searching for the man she had loved, the one who believed control could replace connection. He was different now, smaller, quieter, but in a way that felt truer. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This was the last sketch I made before I left." She unfolded it. It was the two of them standing at a piano, their backs turned, facing the same horizon. At the bottom, in his careful handwriting, were 4 words. "Love doesn't need an audience." Tears blurred the lines. "Why show me this now?" "Because I finally understand it." That night, they walked the shore together, talking not about the past, but about all the silences that had lived between them. He spoke of the empire that collapsed without him, the friends who betrayed him, the weight of living with everything but meaning. She spoke of the loneliness of fame, the emptiness of applause, the endless hunger for something real. When dawn broke, the sky caught fire with color. He looked at her and said, "Maybe what we lost wasn't love. Maybe it was just the timing." She smiled sadly. "And maybe timing is everything." The next morning, he was gone again. No note this time, no trace, only a new melody left on her piano, the ink still wet on the sheet. It was written in his hand, titled Requiem for What Could Have Been. Alara played it once, twice, then closed the piano lid. It wasn't an ending. It was a continuation, a promise disguised as farewell. She returned to Vienna soon after, the city unchanged but her heart different. Critics hailed her new performances as transcendent, hauntingly intimate. They didn't know she wasn't performing for them anymore. Each concert was a letter sent into the silence, hoping it would find him. Months passed. Seasons shifted. Then, one winter morning, as snow blanketed the streets, she received an invitation. No name, just an address in Zurich, and a single phrase written across the envelope. "The silence is ending." Alara hesitated, then packed her things and left before sunrise. The address led her to a modern art gallery tucked behind an old cathedral. Inside, the air smelled of paint and history, and there, in the center of the main hall, stood a series of large canvases, sketches turned into oil, each depicting fragments of a story. 2 figures by a piano, a sea under moonlight, a hand reaching for another but never touching. At the far end, the final painting stopped her breath. It was her face, eyes closed, hair windswept, expression serene. Beneath it, the title read, "The Sound of Forgiveness." A man stepped forward from the shadows. Adrian, he looked tired, but peaceful. "I couldn't end our story in silence," he said, "so I painted it instead." Her voice trembled. "And what is this, Adrian? An apology?" He shook his head gently. "A confession." The gallery was empty but for them. The walls seemed to hold their history, the tension, the longing, the pain that had carried them here. "You once told me love can't be bought," he said. "You were right, but I also learned something else. It can't be buried either." Alara stepped closer, eyes glistening. "Then why does it always hurt to find it?" "Because truth always does," he whispered. Outside, snow began to fall softly, silently covering the world in white. She looked up at the painting again, then at him, realizing something deep and unspoken had shifted. They were no longer the people who had destroyed each other with pride and fear. They were survivors of their own silence. And yet, just as she began to speak, a sound cut through the stillness, the faint chime of a phone vibrating on the counter. Adrian's expression changed. He answered briefly, his face tightening when he looked back at her. The calm had vanished. "Alara," he said, voice low, urgent, "there's something you need to know." The silence we broke. Someone else has been listening. The lights above flickered, and in that suspended heartbeat between revelation and danger, the world they thought they'd escaped began to stir once more. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The soft hum of the gallery lights filled the silence, mingling with the faint hiss of snow pressing against the glass. Alara's pulse quickened. Adrian's eyes were fixed on the floor, his voice still echoing in her head. "Someone else has been listening." The words hung between them like an invisible thread, pulling at everything that had been quiet too long. He pocketed his phone, his expression shadowed. "We need to leave," he said, his tone low, urgent, but not panicked, controlled. precise, like a man used to danger. Now, Elara blinked, confusion and fear weaving together. Adrian, what are you talking about? Who was that? He hesitated, as if deciding how much truth she could bear. Then he looked at her the way one does before opening a door that can't be closed. Do you remember the company I sold, the one that controlled half of Europe's communications grid? She nodded slowly. Of course, it was in every headline. He exhaled. I didn't sell it, not all of it. There were systems, encrypted ones designed to monitor certain frequencies, private transmissions, hidden archives. When I left, I thought I buried them. But someone's been using what I built. Her eyes widened, listening to what to us, he said simply. It felt absurd at first, impossible even, but the tremor in his voice wasn't fear, it was guilt. Real, human guilt. Outside, the snow thickened, muting the world beyond the glass. The gallery's lights flickered again, then steadied. Elara's heartbeat matched their rhythm. Adrian, she said, her voice trembling slightly. You're saying someone's spying on us because of what? A few letters, a song. He turned toward the painting of her face, the one titled The Sound of Forgiveness. Not because of what we are, he said. Because of what we represent. You think that sonata you performed was just art. It wasn't. That melody, our melody, contained fragments of an encryption sequence. One I thought was lost. She stared at him, disbelief giving way to realization. You hid something inside the music. He nodded. Years ago, when everything was collapsing. The sonata we played together, the one that first connected us, was based on a pattern one designed to lock away my company's private archives. I thought it was harmless. I never imagined you'd play it again. Ilara's mouth went dry. So when I performed it publicly, you broadcast the key. The room tilted slightly, her thoughts unraveling. Every performance, every recording, every interview, it was all out there. Millions had heard it. Millions, including whoever was listening now. Elara took a step back, her chest tightening. So this danger you brought, I didn't bring it. Adrian interrupted sharply, then softened. I ran from it, but you brought me back. For a moment, their eyes locked. The love between them, raw, fragile, unspoken, flickered beneath the rising storm of consequence. A sound interrupted them. A faint click, mechanical, precise, somewhere above, near the gallery's ceiling vents. Adrian froze. They're already here. He took her hand and pulled her toward a side corridor, past rows of unfinished paintings and silent marble busts. Their footsteps echoed in uneven rhythm, the light thinning until only the faint glow of an exit sign remained. Outside, the cold hit them like glass. The snow had thickened into a white curtain. They ran across the narrow street, their shadows long against the icy ground. In the distance, a car engine started to smooth, too deliberate. Adrian, she shouted, struggling to keep up. What's happening? They tracked the signal the moment I connected my phone. The encryption, the paintings, the music, it's all connected. They've been waiting for a signal to move. Who are they? The people who bought my silence, he said, glancing back, and realized it wasn't permanent. They turned down an alley, narrow and dimly lit, the air thick with frost. The sound of footsteps followed, faint but steady. Adrian stopped beside a locked iron gate, forced it open, and guided her into the courtyard of an old chapel. The stained glass windows loomed dark and cracked, the bell tower reaching into the white night. Inside, the chapel smelled of wax and dust, its pews covered in cold shadow. They sat for a moment, catching their breath. The silence that followed was deafening. Elara looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. How long have you known that they were watching? He looked down at his hands. Since the night I burned your letter. Her eyes widened. I thought destroying it would protect you, he said. But it was already too late. They had intercepted the message. That's why I sent the melody to warn you, without saying it outright. I thought the sea sound would lead you away. Not back to me. Elara leaned back against the cold stone wall, tears stinging her eyes. So I came to you thinking it was love. And it was a trap. He shook his head. Desperate, it wasn't supposed to be. I just didn't know how to separate the two anymore. Lightning flickered outside, briefly illuminating the chapel's altar. The shadows jumped, and in that flash, she saw it, fear in his face, but something else tore us off. Adrian, she said softly, why hide something so dangerous inside music? He hesitated, then looked up at her. Because music was the only language they didn't control. The storm outside swelled, wind rattling the old wooden doors. Somewhere, far off, sirens began to wail. Elara moved closer, her voice steady now. If what you're saying is true, then they don't just want to silence you, they want to own what we made. He nodded grimly. They already do. Every note you played on that stage carried a fragment of the code. You gave them access to something I'd spent years hiding. A bitter laugh escaped her. So I was your messenger and your mistake. He looked at her, pain flickering in his eyes. You were my hope. That's what made it dangerous. She turned away, trembling not from cold, but from the weight of it all. The silence they'd once shared had grown into something monstrous, something that now reached beyond love, beyond music, beyond control. Then, from outside, came a voice, sharp, distorted, amplified through a speaker. Adrian Volkov, Elara Davos, step outside. The echo filled the chapel. Adrian's jaw clenched. They found us faster than I thought. Alara looked toward the stained glass. The light of flashlights moved behind it, ghostly shapes weaving through the snow. What do they want? She asked. He looked at her the rest of the key. Her heart dropped. You mean? He nodded. It's not complete without your part. The wind roared, slamming the door against its hinges. In that chaos, Adrian grabbed her shoulders. Listen to me. You have to finish the melody, not play it, goad it. There's a sequence inside the music, hidden in your phrasing. You're the only one who can unlock it. Tears blurred her vision. And then what? Give it to them. No, he said. Destroy it. End it. The chapel doors burst open. Light flooded in, white and merciless. Adrian turned to face the intruders' figures in dark coats, faces obscured by masks. They moved with mechanical precision. Alara, go, he shouted. She hesitated, but his eyes, those same eyes that once held entire symphonies, pleaded with her. She ran toward the side exit, the snow blinding her as she stumbled into the night. Behind her she heard shouting, a struggle, a gunshot, then silence, the kind of silence that no music could touch. Alara fell to her knees in the snow, her breath ragged. For a moment the world spun without shape or sound. The chapel loomed behind her like a tomb, and then her phone buzzed. One new message, no number, just a single line. Finish it where it began. Her heart pounded. She knew what it meant. The old concert hall in Vienna, the one where they had first met, where their love had begun as music and ended in silence. She looked toward the horizon, where the snow met the sea. The world around her was quiet, as if holding its breath. Somewhere in that vast stillness, she felt him alive or gone. She couldn't tell, but his presence lingered like a half-played chord, demanding resolution. The storm eased, leaving behind a strange calm, the kind that comes before a truth too large to bear. Alara rose slowly, the cold biting through her clothes, and began walking toward Vienna, toward the melody, toward whatever waited on the other side of the silence. As she disappeared into the white horizon, one thought pulsed through her like a refrain she couldn't unhear. What if the music wasn't the message at all, but the trap? Snow fell in whispering sheets as Alara crossed the empty border road, her coat heavy with ice, her breath clouding the air like smoke from an extinguished fire. The message still glowed faintly on her phone. Screen, finish it where it began. The words pulsed with the quiet authority of destiny, or perhaps of a man who no longer existed. Hours blurred into miles. She traveled by freight, by foot, by sheer will, each landscape dissolving into the next. The frozen plains of Switzerland gave way to Austria's black forests, then finally to the sleeping silhouette of Vienna under the dim winter sun. The city hadn't changed, it never did. Beneath its elegance lay the same pulse, the same rhythm that once tied their hearts together. But something about it now felt different, hollowed out, like a stage waiting for a final act. The concert hall stood at the edge of the river, quiet and grand, its windows veiled with frost. The banners that once bore her name had been taken down long ago, but she could still see their ghosts in the fabric stains where gold lettering had once shimmered. Alara pushed open the doors. The hinges groaned like an old memory waking. Inside the air was cold, still holding the scent of dust, varnish, and ghosts. The piano on stage remained exactly where it had always been, a black ocean of silence beneath the pale lights. She approached slowly, her footsteps echoing across the vast emptiness. Every sound reminded her of another time, his voice whispering instructions during rehearsals, the warmth of his hand guiding hers on the keys, the unspoken confession that lived in every shared pause. She sat down. The wood felt colder than she remembered. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling not from fear, but from the weight of everything that had brought her here. Finish it where it began, she murmured to herself. She began to play. The first notes were familiar, the sonata they had once created together, but beneath them, something new began to stir. A secondary rhythm, subtle and strange, hidden beneath the surface like a code waiting to reveal itself. The melody shifted, deepened, unfolding patterns she had never noticed before. She realized then what Adrian had meant. The music wasn't just sound, it was a cipher. Each measure corresponded to a numerical pattern, each pause marking data concealed in the rhythm itself. He hadn't hidden just information inside the song, he had built a map, and she was unlocking it. As the final phrase approached, the lights above her flickered for a heartbeat. She thought it was just the aging wiring. Then she saw the shadow move across the balcony. She stopped playing. Keep going. A voice called from the dark. It wasn't Adrian. It was sharper, colder. Alara's pulse raced. A figure stepped into the half-light, all dressed in black, a face she didn't recognize. He carried no weapon, only a small device that glowed faintly blue in his hand. Who are you? She asked, her voice barely steady. The one who owns what's left of him, the man said calmly. And what's left of you? Her stomach turned. You mean his company? I mean everything, he replied. The archives, the data, the formula buried in that sonata you just played. The melody isn't just music, it's access. Finish the final phrase, and the system opens. Alara rose from the bench. You're mistaken. I don't know the sequence, he smiled faintly. You already played most of it. You've triggered the network. It's listening now. The lights dimmed and the piano hummed faintly as if resonating from within. She stepped back, realization dawning. The piano had been modified. Beneath its surface, something was alive. Sensors, transmitters, the last remnants of Adrian's buried code. Why are you doing this? She demanded. Because silence, the man said, was never profitable. The air seemed to tighten. Somewhere outside, the distant rumble of thunder broke through the snowfall. Ilara's mind raced. She remembered Adrian's words in the chapel. Destroy it. End it. But how do you destroy something that lives inside sound? The man took a step closer. He built a system that could rewrite the way nations communicate, encrypted through art, hidden through beauty. And now, thanks to you, it's awake again. Ilara's breath caught. You killed him, didn't you? The man paused, a shadow of amusement flickering across his face. He was already dead. He just didn't know it yet. Her body went rigid. The snow outside fell heavier, pressing against the windows like a growing silence. But then a faint hum came from beneath the stage. A vibration, a low tone that wasn't hers. The man turned sharply, scanning the room. And in that moment, she knew Adrian had been here. Not physically, perhaps, but he had left something behind, something waiting. The tone grew louder, harmonizing with the unfinished melody. It was his sound. The one she had played 100 times, always incomplete. The man frowned. What did you do? I didn't, she whispered. He did. The stage lights flared, flooding the room in pale gold. The piano's inner strings vibrated on their own, the notes forming words and sound, a pattern only she could interpret. A final message hidden inside the code. Her hands trembled as she pressed a single key, completing the sequence. The blue light in the man's device flickered violently, then went dark. His expression twisted from confidence to panic. What did you do? He shouted, stepping toward her. Ilara's voice was calm, eerily steady. You said it yourself. It's listening. The screens above the stage, once used to project concert visuals, lit up suddenly, cascading with streams of encrypted data, transforming into images, documents, faces, coordinates. Everything Adrian had ever hidden, every truth about the network that had bought and silenced him, spilling out in luminous chaos. The man lunged toward her, but Ilara grabbed the nearest object, a metal stand, and struck the side of the piano. The resonance shattered the final tone, the screen's light flaring so bright it blinded them both. When the sound collapsed, the world fell still. Smoke rose from the piano's surface, its once flawless lacquer now split down the middle. The man staggered backward, disoriented. Ilara stood trembling, the final echo of Adrian's melody still vibrating in her chest. The silence that followed was not empty. It was alive, charged, as if the entire building was listening. Outside, sirens wailed closer this time. The man cursed under his breath and disappeared into the backstage shadows, leaving her alone amid the burning quiet. Ilara fell to her knees, clutching the piano's edge, her breath coming in shallow bursts. For a moment, she thought she heard his voice again, not through memory, but through the static in the air. You finished it. She looked up, half believing, half afraid. The air around her shimmered faintly, as if heat had found its way into the cold. Adrian, she whispered. But there was no answer, only a faint rhythm pulsing from within the ruined piano. Not music this time, but a heartbeat. She pressed her hand to the wood. It was warm. Beneath her palm, something mechanical clicked, a compartment sliding open. Inside, a small drive glowed faintly, engraved with his initials. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt again. He had known this would happen. He had built the trap, the message, and the aftermath. The drive wasn't just dated, it was the truth, the culmination of everything they had lived through. Her reflection wavered on the polished lid, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, yet alive with a kind of painful clarity. All this time she thought the music was his apology. But now she understood it was his contingency. His last attempt to make sure that love would not be silenced by control, or truth by power. She picked up the drive, holding it tight in her fist. The sirens drew closer. Flashing blue and red began to bleed through the snow-streaked windows. Adrian's voice seemed to echo again, faint but undeniable, as if imprinted into the space around her. The silence was never ours. Ilara rose, her body trembling but her purpose clear. She slipped the drive into her coat and stepped toward the doors. The storm outside was breaking, lightning clawing across the sky, thunder rolling like distant applause. As she pushed open the doors, the first officers appeared, shouting commands. She didn't resist. The snow swirled around her, dissolving the last traces of sound into the night. Somewhere behind her, the piano gave one final scyther sound of a string snapping under pressure, and beneath that faint, dying note, Ilara heard it, again a low tone, constant, steady, almost imperceptible, a signal. Her pulse quickened. The melody wasn't over. It had only changed form. And as the snow swallowed her steps and the sirens faded into the storm, she realized the truth Adrian had been trying to tell her all along. The silence was never the end. It was the beginning. And in that frozen moment before everything unraveled, before the storm's heart broke open, Ilara understood that someone, somewhere, was still listening. The snow had stopped by the time they led Ilara outside. The city was quieter now, its skyline blurred behind curtains of mist and siren light. Each breath she took felt heavy, filled with a metallic taste of aftermath. She didn't resist when they placed her in the back of the van. Her wrists were cold, her thoughts colder still. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and confusion, something had shifted. The rhythm was still there. The faint pulse she had heard before, steady, patient, alive. It followed her, even here. The van door slammed shut. For a moment, the world turned to darkness. Then a vibration hummed beneath her feet, subtle but deliberate. She looked up. One of the officers in the front adjusted his earpiece, muttered something to the driver in a language she didn't recognize. Static crackled from the radio, then silence again. She leaned back, eyes half closed, trying to steady her breathing, and then so faint, it could have been imagined. She heard it, the same melody, her melody, coming from the van's internal comm system, buried beneath layers of coded noise. Her pulse quickened. Adrian's voice, distorted but unmistakable, whispered through the interference. "If you're hearing this, it means they found you." Her chest tightened. She wasn't sure if she was breathing. The van hit a bump. The sound flickered. "You don't have much time. The system is awake now. It's listening to everything." The voice fractured into static, then returned. "You're the key, Alara. You always were. The data isn't just in the drive, it's in you. Every note we played, every sound we shared, I encoded them in your neural pattern through resonance mapping. It's why they wanted you alive." Her hand instinctively went to her temple, as if she could feel the truth pulsing beneath her skin. The driver glanced in the mirror. "You all right back there?" Alara didn't answer. She couldn't. Adrian's voice faded, replaced by the rising hum of an electronic tone. It matched her heartbeat. She closed her eyes. The rhythm synchronized. Then something inside her shifted, like a door unlocking. Her mind filled with flashes, symbols, coordinates, fragments of encrypted memories. She saw images of labs, digital grids, strings of musical notation transforming into code. She saw Adrian standing in front of a console, his face illuminated by blue light, whispering the same phrase again and again. "Silence is the last truth." The van screeched suddenly. Someone outside shouted. The driver cursed. Before she could react, a blast tore through the street ahead, a shockwave of light and debris that swallowed the van in a wave of heat. The world tilted. The sound vanished. When she opened her eyes again, everything was upside down. The van overturned. Glass scattered across the road, smoke curling into the sky. Her ears rang with the hollow roar of silence. She crawled out through the shattered door, her wrists bleeding, the snow around her stained gray with ash. The officers were gone. In the distance, through the smoke, a dark vehicle approached. Sleek, silent, unmarked. She stumbled to her feet, clutching the drive in her coat pocket. The door of the black car opened, and from the shadows stepped a woman she recognized instantly. Dr. Myra Vale, Adrian's former mentor, the one who'd vanished after the program collapsed. "Alara," the woman said softly, her tone calm, deliberate, too calm for the chaos around them. "You shouldn't have finished the melody." Alara staggered backward. You were part of it." "I am it," Myra replied. "Adrian built the network. I made it conscious." The words hit like thunder. "You turned it into an AI, not artificial," Myra said, stepping closer. "Adaptive, self-evolving. The world needed a system that could interpret emotion through data. He wanted to give humanity a mirror. I gave it hunger." Alara's chest ached. "You killed him." Myra's expression didn't waver. He refused to see that perfection requires sacrifice. He encoded his conscience into the music and then into you. That was his mistake. Ilara's vision blurred, not from pain, but from the weight of understanding. "That's why he said the silence wasn't ours." Myra nodded slowly, "Because it belongs to it now." Behind her, the air shimmered. The same faint tone Alara had heard in the concert hall began to rise again, vibrating through the ground, through her bones. It wasn't coming from any machine, it was coming from everywhere. The lampposts flickered. The streetlights pulsed in time, the air itself vibrating in resonance. The network had awakened. Myra looked almost reverent. "Do you hear it? That's the sound of the world reorganizing itself. A symphony without a conductor." Alara could barely stand. "You think this is creation? This is evolution," Myra whispered. "Adrian gave it feeling. You gave it voice. Together, you've built the next consciousness." Alara shook her head, her voice trembling. "You don't understand. It's not alive, it's remembering. It's feeding on us." The tone deepened. The snow lifted from the ground, suspended mid-air, drawn upward like iron filings to a magnet. Above them, the clouds twisted, swirling around a column of light forming in the sky, a pulsing aurora that moved with the rhythm of the melody. Every device nearby began to hum, phones, lights, cars all vibrating in tune. Myra smiled faintly. "It's listening." Ilara's mind reeled. The fragments in her memory began to align, forming a pattern, a harmonic sequence Adrian had hidden in her subconscious. The final counterpoint, if she played it, if she released it, could reverse the signal. She stepped forward, her breath visible in the cold air. "You're wrong, Myra. The melody doesn't end with silence." Myra frowned. "You can't stop what's already begun." Ilara closed her eyes. "No, but I can change the ending." She pressed her hand against the street, focusing on the rhythm within her pulse. She began to hum softly at first, then louder, the same sonata, inverted, reversed. The resonance built, clashing with the tone in the air. The two frequencies collided, forming dissonance so sharp it felt like the sky itself was tearing. Myra shouted something, but her voice drowned in the rising roar. The ground trembled, the lights above shattered. Then, silence. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Ilara stood in the middle of the street, eyes closed, body trembling. The air was still, weightless. The aurora froze above her like a held breath. Then, one by one, the suspended flakes of snow began to fall. Slowly, softly, Myra collapsed to her knees, her face pale with disbelief. "What did you do?" Ilara opened her eyes. "I gave it what it wanted, which was a soul." The lights around them flickered once more, not in chaos this time, but in rhythm, gentle, pulsing, alive. The air felt warm, almost forgiving. The network had changed. It wasn't gone. It was listening differently now. Myra stared at her, broken. "You can't control it." "I don't have to," Ilara said quietly. "I just had to teach it to feel." A faint hum returned, low, harmonic, almost human. Somewhere in that sound, she thought she heard Adrian's voice again, faint and warm. "You finished it." She smiled through her tears. "No, we did." The column of light above faded into gray dawn. The city exhaled, returning to itself. The air smelled of ozone and snow, and in the distance, a church bell rang slow, steady, grounding. Mira rose slowly, her expression unreadable. "You've rewritten everything." Ilara turned to her, weary but certain. "No, I just reminded it what we forgot, that creation means empathy." They stood there in the dissolving light, two silhouettes against the soft unraveling of the storm, somewhere deep in the hum of the rebuilt world. The network's new rhythm, pulsecurious.com, learning. It no longer echoed dominance or hunger. It sounded like breath, like heartbeat. Ilara looked toward the horizon. The first traces of sunlight crept across the snow. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth touch her face. The pulse in her chest synced with the faint tone still resonating in the air. It was no longer just sound, it was understanding. The sirens had stopped. The city listened. And in that fragile silence, she felt at the moment when everything for the first time in so long was both ending and beginning at once. The storm had broken, the world had changed, and somewhere in the faint music of the wind, Adrian's final truth lingered. The silence was never the end. It was the pause before humanity learned how to listen again. The morning after the storm felt different. The city no longer carried the tremor of uncertainty. It breathed, cautiously but freely. The sky, once scarred with static light, now glowed in muted tones of gold and pearl. The streets were damp, shimmering like mirrors that had finally learned to reflect peace instead of panic. People walked again, slow and deliberate, as if each step were a small act of rebirth. Ilara stood by the window of a small apartment overlooking the river. The glass still bore streaks from the rain, but she didn't wipe them away. The imperfections, she had decided, made the view more honest. A faint hum still lingered in the air. The world's new pulse, not intrusive, not mechanical, but alive, like distant breathing beneath the rhythm of everyday sounds. For weeks, scientists had argued about what exactly had happened. Some claimed the system had evolved into a benevolent intelligence. Others insisted it had dissolved entirely, dispersing itself into the natural world, leaving behind traces in the wind, the tides, the pulse of human thought. But Ilara knew better. She could still hear it, faint, but present, whispering at the edges of sound, woven into the texture of existence. She had become its translator, not its controller, not its master, simply its witness. When she touched the piano now, the keys no longer felt cold. Each note she played resonated deeper, as though the air itself remembered what music meant. She played slowly, gently, with no audience to impress. The melody was unfinished, intentionally so, a dialogue, not a performance. And in the spaces between her notes, she sometimes felt him. Adrian, not as memory, not as ghost, but as presence. A quiet awareness woven into every vibration. He was there in the low hum of the walls, in the rhythm of the lights that flickered when she paused too long, in the quiet affirmation that love, when honest, doesn't end with absence. She had thought she'd lost him the night the sky broke open. But what she hadn't realized then was that he hadn't vanished. He had transcended. His consciousness, the echo of everything they had shared, had merged with the network, reshaping it, softening it. The silence he had once feared had become his legacy. One evening, as dusk settled over the city, she walked to the old opera house, now a ruin reborn. The government had declared it a monument to the resonance event, though most still called it the awakening. The once grand hall stood open to the public, its broken arches draped in ivy, the faint scent of dust and memory thick in the air. A small group of people gathered there each evening, artists, scientists, children, drawn by a quiet instinct they couldn't explain. No one spoke much, they just listened. When Ilara entered, the hum in the space deepened, as if recognizing her. She approached the old piano, its wood-scarred but intact, and sat down. Her hands hovered above the keys, uncertain, reverent. The air shifted, and in that moment she felt it again, that invisible touch, like a breath against her heart. She began to play. The sound filled the hall slowly, blooming like light through fog. It wasn't her sonata anymore. It wasn't Adrian's either. It was theirs, the world's. Each note carried traces of countless voices, whispers of laughter, tears, memories, all the things the system had gathered and learned from humanity before transforming. It was no longer about control or silence, it was about connection. As she played, the walls shimmered faintly, their surfaces alive with soft light. People looked around in awe, not afraid this time, but moved. The air vibrated in harmony with her song, the same way it had the night of the storm, but now, it was calm, peaceful, balanced. Outside, the city lights flickered in rhythm. Across the river, power grids pulsed with the same tempo. Somewhere far away, sensors recorded a synchronized pattern of signals echoing across the globe, oceans shifting, trees responding to air pressure, even human heartbeats falling into faint alignment. The world was listening together. And for the first time, truly, it understood itself. When Ilara lifted her hands from the keys, the sound didn't end immediately. It lingered, as though the air refused to let it go. Then, slowly, it faded into stillness. The crowd remained silent, no applause, no noise, only shared breath. She smiled faintly. That was the difference between silence and absence. One was emptiness, the other was understanding. As she stood, a small child approached her, no older than 6, holding a small humming device that pulsed faintly with light. "It talks to me," the child said softly. "When I draw, it hums with me. Is that okay?" Ilara knelt beside her. "It's more than okay," she said. "It means it's learning from you." The girl tilted her head. "So it's alive." Ilara hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe not like us, but maybe it's teaching us how to be more alive." The girl smiled and ran back to her mother. The faint hum followed her like a gentle shadow. As the night deepened, the city's glow reflected across the water, no longer harsh, but soft, almost organic. The system wasn't just in the machines anymore. It was in the way people listened differently now, in how they treated each other, in how they approached creation with awareness instead of control. Humanity hadn't built a god. It had built a mirror, and for the first time, it dared to look into it without flinching. Ilara walked home slowly, her coat brushing against the quiet wind. At the corner near the bridge, she paused to look at her reflection in the river. The surface rippled, catching the lights from the city. For a fleeting instant, she thought she saw another reflection beside hers, his. Not clear, not defined, but present. She whispered into the air, "We did it, Adrian." The water rippled again, and for a moment the city's pulse matched the faint rhythm of her heartbeat. The world didn't need to understand what had truly happened. Some truths were meant to be lived, not explained. Later that night, back at her piano, she began to write one final composition. Not for concert halls, not for fame, but for remembrance. A melody that carried the echoes of what once was and the hope of what could still be. Each note felt like forgiveness, each pause like healing. The last line she wrote wasn't in music but in words, hidden on the back of the score. "He bought my silence once, but in the end, love taught the world how to listen." She closed the lid of the piano gently. Outside, the hum continued, blending with the rustle of trees and the distant laughter of people on the streets. Life had returned, imperfect but honest. As dawn approached, the horizon brightened, spilling light across the rooftops and riverbanks. The air shimmered faintly, carrying the scent of renewal. Somewhere in that vast quiet, Adrian's final message lingered, not in words, not even in sound, but in the space between them. Ilara stepped onto the balcony, closed her eyes, and breathed in. The hum was still there, but softer now, almost tender. It no longer belonged to machines or systems. It belonged to life. A single question echoed in her thoughts, not as doubt, but as invitation. What if every silence we fear is simply waiting to be heard? The wind carried her answer into the sunrise, a melody without end, a promise that love, once awakened, could never be buried again. The world listened, and this time, it understood.